The vast emptiness of space was anything but silent. Deep within the uncharted reaches of the Andromeda sector, a colossal warship lay dormant, hidden within the ruins of a forgotten asteroid field. This was a Nemesis Prime, a war machine lost to history, buried under the debris of its last great battle. For centuries, it remained a ghost, an abandoned relic of a war that no one spoke of anymore. Until now, the distressed beacon flickered to life. A rhythmic, pulsing signal echoed through the dark void, whispering to those who could hear it. Awakening protocol initialized. Deep within the bowels of Nemesis Prime, dormant systems hummed as power surged through its cold metallic veins. The ship's core, long thought dead, pulsed with an eerie blue glow. Something had awakened it. Something had triggered its return. Miles away, aboard the renegade ship Eclipse, a lone scavenger named Dax Vance stared at his terminal, eyes widening as a distress signal appeared on his screen. "What the hell is this?" he muttered under his breath. His fingers danced across the console, decrypting the ancient transmission. Coordinates. A warship. A legend. Dax had spent years chasing ghost stories about Nemesis Prime. But this was different. This wasn't just a myth. It was real, and it was calling out to him. He turned his crew, a ragtag team of ex-soldiers, hackers, and rebels. We might have just found the one thing that could change everything. Little did he know, they weren't the only ones who had heard the call. Across the galaxy, powerful forces stirred. The oppressive Terran Dominion, the ruling force that had crushed every rebellion before it, had been waiting for this moment. Nemesis Prime had awakened, and with it, a war unlike any before was about to begin. The Forgotten Titan. Dax leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly as his mind raced. He had spent years chasing lost artifacts, forgotten ships, and tech that could fetch a fortune on the black market. But Nemesis Prime? That was something else entirely. "Tell me you're kidding," muttered Rael Kessler, the Eclipse's co-pilot and former Dominion pilot, his voice laced with disbelief. "Nemesis Prime is a myth. Even if it were real, we don't have the firepower to claim it." Tessamori, their tech specialist, scoffed. "That's exactly what people thought about the Iron Vault of Xiphos 9, and guess what? We cracked that open last year." Rael folded his arms. "That was a storage facility. This is a warship capable of planetary annihilation." Dax smirked. "Exactly why we need to get there before anyone else." The crew fell silent, weighing the risk. Eclipse was fast, but it wasn't built for combat. Not against the kind of firepower that would come looking for Nemesis Prime. "We're not the only ones who heard the beacon," Dax finally said. "The Dominion will be coming." Tessa sighed, adjusting her hollow displays. "I'll start running system scans. If we're doing this, I want full diagnostics of that ship before we step foot on it." Dax gave a firm nod. "All right then. Strap in. We set course in 5 minutes." The engines of Eclipse roared to life, cutting through the darkness as they burned toward their target. Shadows in pursuit. Unbeknownst to them, the Terran Dominion's Admiral Calveros had already intercepted the transmission. Aboard the dreadnought Harbinger, his crimson-clad officers monitored the beacon's data stream. Veros narrowed his gaze at the display. "So, the ghost of Nemesis Prime has finally surfaced." He turned to his second-in-command. "Deploy an intercept fleet. I want that ship under Dominion control before anyone else lays a finger on it." "Yes, Admiral." As the Harbinger shifted course, warships began to mobilize, vanishing into hyperspace. The race for Nemesis Prime had begun. The Eclipse hurtled through hyperspace, its engines thrumming with a steady, ominous hum. Inside the ship, Dax Vance stood over the main console, his sharp eyes fixed on the holographic display of Nemesis Prime's last known coordinates. The beacon's transmission had grown erratic, as if the ancient warship was struggling against some unseen force to keep its call alive. Tessamori's fingers flew over the control panel. "I'm picking up gravitational anomalies near the target coordinates. Whatever's out there, it's not just a hunk of dead metal floating in space." Rael Kessler frowned. "That's a warship designed to wipe out entire fleets. If it's waking up, it's going to be pissed." Dax smirked, but his mind was already racing ahead. He wasn't worried about an angry warship. He was worried about what else might be lurking in the darkness, waiting for them. Dropping out of hyperspace in 10 seconds, Tessa announced. Everyone strap in. The ship shuddered as it tore out of hyperspace, the starlines collapsing back into distant pinpricks of light. Before them, Nemesis Prime loomed in the void, its massive hull silhouetted against the swirling backdrop of a nebula. It was even larger than Dax had imagined, a behemoth of metal and forgotten history. And they weren't alone. A Dominion patrol vessel, sleek and menacing, hovered near the wreckage, its spotlight sweeping across the surface of the ancient warship. Dax's jaw tightened. Damn it, they beat us here. Rail's hands clenched over the flight controls. Orders. Dax's mind raced. If the Dominion was already here, then Admiral Calveros couldn't be far behind. They needed to act fast. Take us in quiet, he said. We dock on the dark side of Nemesis Prime. We're getting on that ship. Tessa raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? If that thing wakes up while we're inside... We don't have a choice, Dax said grimly. We're not leaving empty-handed. The Eclipse glided toward the warship, hugging the shadowed side of its hull. The docking clamps extended, latching onto the cold metal exterior with a resounding clang. As the airlock cycled open, Dax drew his weapon. Stay sharp, he murmured. We have no idea what we're walking into. Echoes of the past. The interior of Nemesis Prime was a graveyard. The corridors stretched into darkness, lined with rusted bulkheads and flickering emergency lights. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sough of their gear. Rail moved cautiously, his rifle raised. I don't like this. Tessa adjusted her scanner. I'm picking up faint power readings, but they're sporadic. Dax studied the markings on the walls, ancient sigils and worn insignias of a long-forgotten fleet. This ship had seen war, and it had survived. The question was, why had it been abandoned? Then a sound, a low mechanical whir, like a beast stirring in its sleep. The lights flickered, casting long shadows against the walls. Tessa's voice was barely above a whisper. Something still alive in here. Meanwhile, on board the Harbinger, Admiral Calveros stood at the command deck of the Dominion dreadnought, his cold gaze locked onto the holographic display. His officers moved efficiently around him, preparing for their next strike. The Eclipse has docked with Nemesis Prime, a lieutenant reported. Veros allowed a thin smile. Good. Lock onto their signal. When the time is right, we'll remind them why the Dominion rules this galaxy. The hunt had begun. The dim emergency lights cast long, wavering shadows across the corridors of Nemesis Prime as Dax, Tessa, and Rail cautiously advanced. The warship was a relic of destruction, its very presence a testament to battles long forgotten. But the silence within its hull was anything but peaceful. It was the quiet of something waiting, something lurking. Tessa's scanner beeped erratically. I'm picking up sporadic energy signatures. Whatever's in here, it's not entirely dead. Rail's grip tightened around his rifle. Let's hope it stays that way. Dax glanced at the faded Dominion, insignia etched into the bulkhead, running his fingers over the deep scratches that marred its surface. Something had happened here, something violent. He activated his comm. Eclipse, keep the engines warm. If this goes south, we may need a quick exit. A crackling response came through. Understood, Captain, but we're detecting movement outside. Dominion patrols may be converging. Dax muttered a curse. We don't have much time. Let's move. Into the heart of the ship. Their boots echoed against the metal floor as they pressed deeper into the warship's interior. The deeper they went, the more evident it became that Nemesis Prime was not as abandoned as it seemed. Signs of recent disturbance littered the path. Scorch marks from blaster fire, shattered control panels, and doors that looked as if they'd been forcibly pried open. Tessa knelt beside a long-dead body clad in what remained a Dominion officer's uniform. These aren't decades old, she whispered. Some of these bodies are fresh. Rail exhaled sharply. Then we're not alone. Dax gestured forward. We find the control room. If we can get into the warship systems, we might figure out what the Dominion was doing here before us. As they turned the next corridor, a sudden metallic clang made them all freeze. The sound of something heavy shifting. Tessa raised her scanner. There's movement, she hissed. Something big. The ship groaned, and suddenly the lights flickered to life. A deep, guttural hum vibrated through the floors, and the walls seemed to tremble as though the warship itself was waking up. Nemesis Prime reawakens. Alarms blared as the ship's AI system, dormant for centuries, suddenly activated. A synthetic voice crackled over the loudspeakers, distorted and ancient. Intruders detected. Unauthorized personnel will be eliminated. Dax's stomach twisted. Move. Now. Gun turrets dropped from the ceiling, their barrels glowing red as they powered up. Rail dove behind a bulkhead as the first volley of energy blasts tore through the air. Tessa rolled into cover beside him, gripping her blaster. Dax fired at the nearest turret, striking it dead center. Sparks rained down as it exploded. We need to disable the security system. Tessa was already working, her fingers flying across her wrist console. I can shut it down, but I need time. Rail ducked as another turret spun toward them. He let off a burst of fire, taking out its optics. We don't have time. The ship shuddered again, and from the far end of the corridor, something massive stirred. A mechanical monstrosity, half war machine and half sentinel, emerged from the shadows. Its glowing red eyes locked onto them, and it let out a metallic growl before charging forward. Dax barely had time to react before the creature swung a massive claw, sending him crashing into the wall. Pain exploded through his ribs. Tessa screamed, emptying her blaster into the monster, but the shots barely slowed it. It's got armor plating. We need something bigger. Rail yanked a grenade from his belt, primed it, and hurled it straight into the beast's exposed joint. Get down! The explosion rocked the corridor, sending debris flying. When the dust settled, the mechanical behemoth twitched, then fell silent. Tessa gasped for breath. What the hell was that? Dax groaned as he pulled himself up. I don't know, but I think we just met Nemesis Prime security detail. The Dominion strikes. Before they could recover, Dax's comm crackled. Captain, Dominion forces inbound. They're locking onto our signal. Dax's heart pounded. Damn it, they know we're here. Tessa pulled up the warship schematics. There's a control room a level up. If we can reach it, we might be able to take control of the ship before they do. Rail reloaded his rifle. Then let's move before they cut us off. With alarms blaring and the Dominion closing in, the race for Nemesis Prime had truly begun. The corridors of Nemesis Prime were now alive with chaos. The red emergency lights bathed everything in a bloody glow, and the distant sound of boots striking metal echoed through the ship. Dominion forces had arrived. Dax's mind raced as he led Tessa and Rail through the maze-like passageways. The control room was their only chance of survival. If they could gain access before the Dominion forces, they might be able to turn Nemesis Prime's weapons against them. Tessa checked her scanner. They're closing in 2 squads, maybe more. We have to move faster. Rail glanced behind them, gripping his rifle tightly. We're going to have company real soon. Dax nodded. No more sneaking. We run. Now. They bolted down the corridor, their footfalls ringing loudly. As they rounded a corner, a squad of Dominion soldiers emerged ahead, their rifles already raised. Down! Dax shouted. Blaster fire erupted, lighting the hallway in streaks of blue and red. Dax rolled behind a steel crate, returning fire while Rail dropped to one knee, his shots finding their marks. Tessa ducked behind a support beam, pulling out a small spherical device from her belt. Flashbang out, she yelled, tossing it into the enemy ranks. A brilliant white explosion blinded the Dominion soldiers, their screams piercing the air. Rail wasted no time, picking them off with precise shots. When the last soldier fell, Tessa exhaled sharply. That won't be the last of them. Dax pulled up the ship's schematics on his wrist console. We're close. Just a few more corridors. The Dominion's trap. They reached a massive blast door at the end of the hallway. The control room lay just beyond it. Tessa sprinted to the console, hacking into the door's ancient systems. I need a minute, she muttered. Dax and Rail took position, ready for another wave of enemies. But before they could react, a deep mechanical thud resonated through the walls. A metallic voice crackled through the ship's speakers. Control room lockdown engaged. All intruders will be neutralized. Tessa's eyes widened. They've activated a lockdown. I can override it, but... A deafening explosion rocked the ship. From behind, another squad of Dominion soldiers stormed into the corridor. Led by a towering figure in black armor, Commander Voss, one of the Dominion's elite enforcers. "Drop your weapons," he ordered, his voice like gravel, "or die where you stand." Dax gritted his teeth. They were outgunned, outnumbered, but surrender was not an option. Rail whispered, "I count 10, heavily armed." Tessa's fingers danced over a console. Almost there, stalled him. Dax took a deep breath. "Voss, you really think the Dominion can hold this ship?" Voss smirked. "It already belongs to us." Dax fired the first shot. Fight for the ship. Blaster bolts filled the air. Rail dove for cover, his sniper instincts taking over as he picked off soldiers one by one. Tessa ducked low, still working on the door's override. Dax faced Voss head-on, exchanging fire with the armored brute. Voss barely flinched as Dax's shots glanced off his reinforced plating. He advanced like a machine, his heavy boots clanking ominously. With a roar, Voss lunged, swinging a massive energy blade. Dax barely dodged, the blade slicing through the metal wall like butter. Rail shouted, "Dax, move!" Dax rolled away just as Rail fired, striking Voss in the shoulder. The commander grunted but did not fall. Tessa let out a victorious cry. Doors open. "Go!" They sprinted inside, sealing the blast doors behind them. Voss's furious pounding echoed through the steel. Dax turned to Tessa. "Can you activate the ship's defenses?" She nodded. "Give me a second." "Outside," Voss snarled. "You can't hide forever." Turning the tide, Tessa's fingers flew across the console. "I'm overriding the security systems. I can turn the ship's turrets against them." Rail grinned. "Do it." A robotic voice confirmed. Automated defenses activated, targeting unauthorized personnel. From outside, shouts of panic erupted as Nemesis Prime's internal turrets came to life, firing upon the Dominion troops. Explosions shook the ship as the battle turned in their favor. Dax exhaled. "That buys us time. Now let's take control of this warship." As they worked to seize command, the Dominion forces outside fell into chaos. But Commander Voss was still out there, and he wasn't finished yet. The hum of the ship's automated turrets echoed in the narrow corridors as explosions rippled to the hull of Nemesis Prime. The crew of the Eclipse had secured the control room, but the battle was far from over. Commander Voss and his Dominion forces weren't going down without a fight. Dax stood at the helm, his hands gripping the console as he scanned the chaotic battlefield outside. The ship's automated defenses were tearing through the Dominion forces, but Voss was not a man easily deterred. The screams of his soldiers and the heavy sound of boots charging down the hallways echoed closer and closer. "Tessa, how much longer until we can take full control?" Dax asked, his voice tight with urgency. Tessa's eyes flickered over the rapidly shifting data on her console. "I'm bypassing the final encryption. It's taking longer than I thought, but we're close. Just hang on." Rail was standing by the door, his rifle trained on the hallway. "We don't have much time," he said. "Voss and his elite troops will be here soon." Dax's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll make sure they don't get any closer." The ship shook as another barrage of blasts hit its outer hull. The automated turrets were still firing, but they couldn't hold the Dominion off forever. The deep, guttural growl of Voss's voice echoed over the intercom. "You can't win, Vance." Voss sneered. "You're playing a game you can't possibly understand. This warship belongs to the Dominion, and I will see it back in our hands, no matter the cost." Dax clenched his fist. "You'll have to get through me first." Outside, the sounds of Dominion soldiers rallying grew louder. The countdown was on. "Hang in there," Dax muttered under his breath as he turned to Tessa. "We're getting close, right?" Tessa didn't look up from the console. "Almost. I've just got to override the last few firewalls." Dax nodded, but his mind was racing. The weight of their situation was sinking in. They had come this far, but the Dominion wasn't about to let them have the Nemesis Prime without a fight. Voss's forces would be relentless. They had to move fast. The door to the control room suddenly slid open with mechanical hiss, and a squad of Dominion soldiers rushed in, weapons raised. Dax's heart skipped a beat as he saw the unmistakable silhouette of Commander Voss standing behind them, his black armor gleaming in the dim light. "Drop your weapons," Voss barked, his voice cold as ice. "Now!" The crew of Eclipse didn't hesitate. Rail was the first to fire, his sniper rifle sending 2 Dominion soldiers crashing the ground in quick succession. Tessa drew her blaster and fired, taking down another soldier with a precise shot to the chest. But they were outnumbered. More Dominion soldiers poured into the control room, and it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. "Take cover," Dax shouted, grabbing a nearby support beam and ducking behind it. The blaster fire intensified as the room became a battlefield. Dax popped up from behind cover, firing at the advancing soldiers. Voss's forces were well trained, but they were no match for the crew of Eclipse's speed and precision. Tessa cursed under her breath as her console beeped urgently. "I'm almost through, Dax. Just a little longer." Dax nodded, his mind already calculating the next move. The battle was taking a toll, and they needed to take control of the warship. Now. He peeked around the support beam again, but this time Voss was right there, charging straight toward him, his massive energy blade crackling with deadly power. "You're out of options, Vance," Voss said as he swung his blade with terrifying precision. Dax barely managed to duck in time. The blade slicing through the air where his head had been just a second before. He rolled to the side and fired, but Voss's armor absorbed the shot with ease. The commander smirked. "You'll regret ever stepping foot on this ship, Vance." Dax's heart raced as he tried to stay one step ahead of Voss, dodging the heavy blade with every move. He couldn't hold out much longer, and they needed an opening. Fast. That's when he heard it, the whirring of the ship's AI systems, coming to life in the control room. The voice of Nemesis Prime, though distorted and faint, echoed throughout the room. Authorization granted. Ship systems online. Weapon systems unlocked. Tessa's voice rang out over chaos. "I did it. I have control." The ship shuddered again, but this time it was different. A deep, powerful hum filled the air as Nemesis Prime's weapon systems powered up. The automated turrets outside fell silent, and the control room doors slammed shut, locking in place. Commander Voss froze. What have you done?" Dax smiled. "We just took control of your ship." Before Voss could react, Dax opened fire, hitting him square in the chest. The blast sent the commander stumbling backward, but he didn't fall. His eyes were filled with fury as he glared at Dax. "Finish it," Rail said, his voice calm as he aimed his rifle at Voss. Dax hesitated for a moment. There was no turning back now. He stepped forward, his weapon trained on Voss. "This ends here." A final shot rang out, and Commander Voss crumpled to the floor, defeated, with the Dominion commander down. Dax quickly turned his attention back to Tessa. "Are the systems secure?" Tessa nodded, her fingers flying across the console as she sealed the control room. "We've got full control. Nemesis Prime is ours." Outside, the battle was still raging, but now it was the crew of Eclipse who held the upper hand. The Dominion forces were disorganized, scrambling to regain control of the warship, but it was too late. Dax looked out the viewport, watching as the Dominion ships were forced to retreat. The battle for Nemesis Prime had been won, but this was just the beginning. "We did it," Tessa said, her voice filled with exhaustion but relief. Dax's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "This war is far from over, but now we have a weapon that could change everything." Rail slung his rifle over his shoulder. "Let's make sure it's on our side, then." And as the Eclipse sailed away from Nemesis Prime, a new chapter in the galaxy's war had begun. One that would be written by the crew of the Eclipse and the mysterious, long-forgotten warship that had been brought back to life. The fight for the galaxy's future had only just begun.